Logo, Chaffey College. Wignall Museum of Contemporary Art Home Edition. The outline of a house appears around the text. Artist Talk. Ben Passmore, October 26, 2020 from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. Rebecca Trewick.
Everybody, thank you for joining us at today's program, presented as part of the Wignall Museum's Home Edition. As curated artist talks, workshops, and discussions featuring artists and cultural workers. My name is Rebecca Trewick. I'm the director and curator at the Wignall Museum. The Wignall Museum is a teaching museum and interdisciplinary art space that introduces Chaffey College students, faculty, staff, and community members to innovative contemporary art objects and ideas. By fostering critical thinking, visual literacy, discourse, and empathy, the museum seeks to enhance the intellectual and cultural life of our community. We want to take a moment to recognize that we're situated on the Rancho Cucamonga campus of Chaffey College, which resides on the traditional and unceded lands of the Tongva people. We offer our respect to the elders, both past, present, and future.
Hello, my name is Roman Stollenwerk. I'm the assistant curator at the Wignall Museum of Contemporary Art. In a moment, Ben Passmore will present it for about a half an hour, and the remaining time will be available for question and answer. Thank you.
Text. This program is a 20-minute presentation followed by questions and discussion.
Thanks, Roman. Today we're thrilled to have artist Ben Passmore with us. Ben Passmore lives on the island of Philadelphia. Oops, I meant the island. The island was New Orleans, and you do not live there anymore. Pardon me. Ben Passmore lives in Philadelphia. His comics are about crime, monsters, anarchism, sexual dysfunction, police brutality, art theory, and his fields. Author of Dayglow A-Hole, Goodbye, Your Black Friend, and most recently, Sports in Hell. He's a regular contributor to The Nib. Please welcome Ben Passmore. Ben, take it away.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Ben sits in a room decorated with strings of white lights. A poster behind him says support the Black Liberation Army.
Depending on how global warming goes, maybe Philly will be an island. So I guess, yeah, I got this presentation. I have no smooth way to transition to it, but I'll just start.
A graphic of Ben, a brown-skinned man with a beard wearing a red baseball cap and a text bubble. Hey, it's Ben.
So, all right. Hey, what's up? I'm Ben. I normally have a beard. I cut it recently. So just when we snap back to video, just imagine me as I was and not the gruesome person I am now. Anyway, so I make comics. Y'all probably know that.
A comic of two men each holding up one finger. A combined text bubble says the word no multiple times.
I make comics, usually through my POV that talk about identity and society and sociopolitical sort of like topics through a Black anarchist lens. I'm generally considered, and I consider myself a political cartoonist, but not so much in like the standard sort of like political party way. I define politics sort of more broadly, and this is sort of my general definition: actions or concepts that engage with forms of force waged by or on an individual and or groups. I'm known mostly for the work I did for the Nib, which is a kind of political editorial and a comics journalism website that also puts out kind of semi-regular publications. And also a bunch of y'all will know me for my comic, Your Black Friend.
Cartoon Ben outstretches his arms toward his comic.
I also do some work for the New York Times and have done sort of Believer magazine. So I kind of do, general stuff.
A cartoon titled, How to Dress for the Protest. Another multi-panel cartoon titled Black Flag.
I don't remember what the slide was for, but anyway, comics about stuff.
Cartoon Ben tosses down a protest sign that reads, Great Import. Speech bubble.
So more recently, I've been trying to get away from writing about sort of my own particular experience of the world and write about things that I'm just sort of generally interested in that don't directly have to do with me. So more recently, I did a comic for the Nib that was just about the first day of uprisings here in Philadelphia.
A cartoon shows police in riot gear shouting "Get back" facing a group of protesters carrying signs, "Justice for George Floyd." Text, that is until the march was aggressively cut off by a wall of riot police and cruisers.
And also I want to just sort of write about general grassroots struggles and a lot about history. I did a comic maybe last month after meeting with this guy, Russell Maroon Shoatz, his son, Russell Maroon Shoatz Jr. Russell Maroon Shoatz is in prison and is probably going to be in prison for the rest of his life. But there's a lot of people like this. This guy in particular was just someone who spent a lot of time and effort doing things in the service of Black liberation, and he's sort of not really known about. So I like to do more things about that.
A cartoon of a man with a raised finger, the implacable Russell Maroon Shoatz. Text. This is Russell Maroon Shoatz. He is a writer, panther, a guerrilla in the Black Liberation Army, and political prisoner confined since 1972.
And yeah, your Black friend has won some awards and stuff, yada, yada, yada. I also like to do genre things. I really started out doing sci-fi stuff, or like more particularly post-event stuff in the series called Dayglow A-Hole.
A comic cover shows a man sitting atop a pile of skeletons, bodies, and broken robots.
And sort of, I guess last year I did a book with my friend Ezra Clayton Daniels that was about gentrification through the genre of horror, more specifically body horror, called Bottom Feeders.
The cover is a brightly colored figure in the letters BTTMFDRS.
Let's see. So, like starting out, I'm from Western Massachusetts, really rural Western Massachusetts, and I was definitely like a blurred before blurs were known to be blurs.
A cartoon of young Ben wearing glasses, a backpack, a striped button-down short-sleeve shirt and khaki shorts. Speech bubble, ha ha, you ain't even a real black. Look at those clothes.
And I started out reading Spawn comics, and then at 16, I got locked up in an institution for 5 years.
Ben in a black and white horizontal striped prisoner uniform, sweat droplets spraying out from his face as he hits a large rock with a pickaxe. Text, artist's rendition. An arrow points to the rock, metaphor, question mark.
And I had read largely superhero comics before that, but the experience of getting institutionalized for almost 5 years sort of inspired me to sort of look at the world differently. You know, it's I think a pretty common experience for I know for other men in my family that have been in prison, but also the experience a lot of people that are in prison, that the experience radicalizes you quite a bit. And even in the reform school, we had a student uprising that very much reflected like revolutionary movements in countries.
A photo of a car on fire.
So getting out, I started trying to engage in street level demonstrations. At first, just like watching them, being totally like wrapped up in just sort of maybe the chaos of them, and then over time got engaged in sort of more like organized projects, books through prisoners, food not bombs. When I was in college, there was stuff around the Iraq War happening a lot. So I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design, which I don't usually like to tell people because me and them had a bad experience. Or I guess they had a bad experience with me.
A comic with 6 panels, Ceci n'est pas un comic. A pipe with text, this is not a pipe. Planes dropping bombs, this is not an invasion. A truck and factory with smokestacks. This is not pollution. A man holds a sign, will work for food. This is not unemployment. Animals at a stream below a mountain, this is not necessary. Nuclear reactors, this is not dangerous.
But when I was in college, I studied a lot of, political cartoonists, primarily, Peter Cooper, and, like just generally a lot of the art coming out of the World War III magazine. And also, the Boondocks by Aaron Magruder was real big. The TV show is out, so, me and my friends were watching that a lot.
A 4-panel comic with 2 brothers. The younger one points. Huey, check this out across the street. Huey replies, yep, white people. You'll see them everywhere out here. Riley says, well, this ain't so bad. At least we'll be entertained regularly. They stare across the street. Riley, I think you should know that real-life white people are not as funny as the ones on Seinfeld. Riley yells, "They're not?"
And then also Joe Sacco was got me really, really inspired to sort of like take my interest in going out and engaging in political protests, demonstrations, riots, sort of like decentralized social environments, and writing about them from the first person, as something that's a combination of like a journalistic piece and a report back.
Title of a cartoon crowded with people, Brother for a Day. My new friend Khaled, whom I met for the first time 5 minutes ago, has a problem. A string of speech bubbles above the crowd.
I also really fell in love with Guy Davis and a lot of like fiction comics writers. There was like when I was in school, there became like more flexibility about the kinds of art that could be just in superhero comics, which seems like a really innocuous sort of change.
A pen and ink drawing of a faceless figure fighting off several monsters with reptilian faces and long tongues holding spears.
But for me, I got really excited about, Guy Davis, but also Mike Mignola, people that were approaching sort of like superhero stories in a more cartoony way. And something that I always had a problem with a lot of the political comics that I was reading is that the art just didn't feel like very engaging. It was often really blocky. Peter Cooper himself was, I don't know, still makes like very, very angular work that felt, I don't know, it didn't feel very now, you know what I mean? And it felt very static. So when trying to develop sort of like my own um, comic style, like I was really trying to blend sort of the approach of the pool cartoonist that I was reading with like like the more cartoony dynamic styles that I was reading in like BPRD.
3 panels show a man being beaten by a baton.
So the first comic I did, which I won't show anyone any significant part of, was a historical fiction about the IWW that was super terrible. But I tried to pitch it after I finished 170 pages of it. I tried to pitch it to Top Shelf, and they said no. And Slave Labor, which I don't even know if that still exists, but I think they're the most known for like Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. Anyway, obviously, my book and that book have everything in common. But Slave Labor just said they would publish it, and then they sort of failed, and it never happened, which I think is ultimately a good thing. Around that time, I moved to New Orleans. It was a couple years after Katrina, and there was a really big anarchist and squatter scene there.
A color cartoon of a crowd gathered around a band playing. A dog says, "Aw, it's just a noise venue now."
And I got, sort of in that time, maybe because the thing with slave labor didn't really work out, I got really disillusioned with the book that I was trying to do, and sort of really, I don't know, like really literal political comics. I just started to feel like I was just making the same content as the people I was reading for an audience that basically already agreed with where I was coming from. So I started just doing comics that were really sci-fi. This is when I started doing like the Dayglow Eho comics that was sort of like still a critique of the subcultures, and sort of like, I guess this the meta cultures that were prevailing in the city that were contributing to the displacement of certain people, particularly impoverished Black people. This is more of that.
A man with hunched shoulders wearing only white briefs says hi. Around him are several skulls, a shack and garbage and clouds of smoke.
So yeah, I got really into squatting.
A photo of Ben in a large room with concrete walls with nothing but a small desk and chair.
This is here me, this in a studio I used to draw in, that was in I guess like a former warehouse, and this you can kind of see it, but the floor used to used to flood, and I would sleep right next to that desk in the middle of that concrete thing on like a wooden pallet. So anyway, so I was real punk. I guess that's the point of this story. And I got really into squatting, and sort of like what I think Murray Bookchin would uncharitably call anarchist lifestyleism. But I started going to comic shows. I hadn't really gone to like, shows like Cake in Chicago, or Small Press Expo in near DC. I hadn't really engaged with like the subculture of comics.
A photo of Ben behind a table filled with comics.
So I started using these like print scams, like these ways that I could get free copies that I had previously used for like, flyers and posters and stuff for demonstrations. I started using them to make my own comics, and then scam my way onto a bus or something and go to these shows and start trying to sell my comics.
A blue monochromatic print of a man with a beard and cap titled Goodbye, or The State of Nature, a comic by Ben Passmore.
And shortly after, probably a couple years into me going to shows and meeting people, I got connected with the Silver Sprocket Bicycle Club in San Francisco, which was a punk label for a bunch of years that actually was the label of this really embarrassing folk punk band I used to like, which I won't name because I don't want to fully snitch on myself. But they published the first thing that someone else had ever published of mine. And it was their first like solo artist book, and it was this book called Goodbye that I had written while hitchhiking with my with an ex of mine for a number of weeks. That was about turning 30. Um, so sometime like a little after that, I was I loved making comics, but it wasn't like I was obviously not making any money at it, and it was turning into sort of like a financial suck or whatever. And even though it was like really dope that Silver Sprocket was I'd published Goodbye, and they had even started reprinting the Dayglow A-Hole comics. I told myself, Ben, like maybe it's time to refocus and do some other things. And kind of around that time, me and a friend of mine, Greg, we lived in a squat together, sort of outside of downtown. We were this sort of like black punk anarchist maroonage outside of like the white punk subculture. And we were reading this Frantz Fanon book, Black Skin, White Mask, which is sort of Frantz Fanon writing about the phenomenology of colonized Black people in Martinique and in France. And it gave us a lot of language, and even gave us sort of like the comfort for us to have a conversation about the alienation that we felt within our own community, and our own alienation we felt with our own identity as Black people that lived in what was considered a white subculture, and Black people that sort of inhabited what felt like at the time like very peripheral sort of interests, as punks and anarchists. Um, so me and Greg had a series of conversations. This is Greg on the right, and
A comic of Ben and Greg, who wears a white t-shirt.
and it went from like just sort of like just joking about shit that had happened to us, but also really just sort of like in some ways reiterating what we had just read, but also just sort of coming up with sort of like a shared understanding about what our experience was and what it meant. And at the end of that, I was supposed to go to the Chicago Alternative Press Expo, where Silver Sprocket was also going to be tabling, and I have a new book. So Greg was like, you should make, this conversation we're having, you should make it into a comic. So I made this comic, Your Black Friends. And at first it was, using the copy scan where I could only do black and white comics, and I could only do 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 14. So I made Your Black Friend be sort of like this little square.
A cartoon of the comic that fits in the palm of his hand.
I like printed, like 2 sets on 8.5 by 11, and then I sliced them down the middle. So it was this like little brick, and I thought that was sort of a more interesting shape. And I took it to Chicago, and I figured, I'd sell a couple, and then maybe I'd bring it back to New Orleans and, sell them at like the anarchist library or something, which is called the Iron Rail, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. And, like hopefully, I was really, like speaking to to Greg really, and people that might be like us, that really could use the experience that me and Greg felt like we had reading Frantz Fanon. And then I thought also as maybe a secondary benefit, maybe our white friends could read it. The general premise of the book was not just to sort of complain about like being Black amongst white people, it was really to sort of deconstruct or reveal things that I thought were really basic that I realized that for white people they didn't really realize, and for Black people who felt sort of embarrassed or not very confident to sort of like admit having certain experiences. Um, so I sold out of all the comics that I had printed in Chicago, and one of the editors at the Nib, this dude Andy Warner, who I kind of known before. He read the book and asked me if I wanted to start working for the Nib. And Silver Sprocket, they saw the book too, and they were like, "Yo, we should reprint it."
A color cover of your Black friend.
And within a couple months, like everything really changed for me. I went from just drawing in my squat, like still trying to do jobs off Craigslist or something, to getting reviewed in different places like NPR, and the New York Times reviewed the book. This is obviously a review for the collection.
The NPR webpage. Text. Your Black friend is back, with plenty to say.
And shortly after that, me and Ezra started working on his the script he had written for this body horror comic that would later become Bottom Feeders, and that Fantagraphics would later publish.
A comic with a yellow background and two figures in pink and purple, one on the ground only visible from the waist down. The second person yanks on the legs.
So that was really just like the start of Ben going from like being just like a weird squatter anarchist that really like to do comics to kind of being more of a professional.
A cartoon of a figure wearing a football helmet and pads with a football in one hand and a gun and knife combination over a pile of skulls and helmets. Title: Sports is Hell.
And then more recently my job has looked like doing regular Nib comics, trying to do comics essays and an opinion and some journalism where I can. And I did this comic for Koyama Press that came out, I guess, last spring, called Sports is Hell, which was inspired by both the Euromaidan movement, or particularly like the Euromaidan movement sort of transition into a proxy war between different kinds of Ukrainian nationalists and Russian nationalists, and also the Eagles Super Bowl riots that happened in Philadelphia, where I live now. And I went outside, I guess me being me, I went outside during the riots, and to just sort of experience them. Like I don't know if I would really call myself a sports fan, although I definitely I played football in high school a little bit, very poorly, and I hadn't really followed it. So it was interesting because the riot, a lot of the aesthetics and sort of the language people used and the social dynamics very much reflected my experiences of political riots, but I had no idea what people were into. Like there seemed to be divisions that I didn't really understand. Like people were like talking shit about Tom Brady, and I was like, I know who Tom Brady is, but I don't fully understand what this is all about. And I thought about how that's probably what people that don't engage with politics, that maybe get stuck in the middle of a political riot, like what they feel. So I sort of just wanted to make this comic that that sort of really engaged in that sort of like talked about what people are like, when their ideas about the world, their ideas about themselves, like really conflict with sort of like a very sort of like very active challenges. So yeah, I guess yeah. So like the ongoing sort of North Stars for me is to try to subvert, to continue to subvert the sort of like bubble that I'm in politically and the mores of traditional political comics.
A comic book with arms and legs stands on a soapbox and yells into a megaphone, "Wake up, sheeple."
I often ask myself, why should anyone care, and try to earn my place, rather than, just assuming people should care about the things I write about.
A cartoon of Ben watching an explosion on TV. Text. Why should anyone care?
And yeah, make things, real personal, make it relatable and fun. I got this new book coming out in 2020. Pantheon was generous enough to option it or whatever. It's going to be called Black Arms to Hold You Up.
Black and white figures with the title in pink and yellow.
And it's going to cover 7 different revolutionaries and revolutionary groups, particularly Black revolutionaries and Black revolutionary groups that existed over the last 100 or so years. What sort of links them together is that they are all part of armed struggle, and part of like a very particular tradition of like Black liberation and Black nationalism to a degree. Yeah, so hopefully that'll be cool. I gotta finish drawing that, and yeah, that's it. Thank you all for bearing with me.
Cartoon Ben says thank you all.
Thank you, Ben. So I know I have some questions from audience members that we got in advance, and we have a number of other questions, and I believe Neil also has some. So maybe I'll kick it off and we can kind of bounce around. Oren, who I think is here, sorry, letting someone in. Okay, so Oren had a question regarding Sports is Hell. So are you considering any other sports for a Sports is Hell spinoff? Or is American football the only sport capable of creating a suitable strain of fanaticism for a comic?
Well, I mean, I think probably, you know, a lot could be done with soccer, which I probably know equal amounts about. But I mean, for Sports as Hell, I think in a lot of ways, like, so the iconography of football works really, really well for like you know, for military combat. So it's really convenient in that sense. You know, it is in many ways just literally simulated war, you know. But I don't think that it matters so much what the actual sport that's sort of being referenced is. So I probably won't do a follow-up, but I probably will do a sequel. I really enjoyed the world, and there's definitely a lot more to be done, you know, especially with the, you know, like I made that before Colin Kaepernick, I think had made a Nike deal, you know what I mean? So there's probably a lot more to be done since, you know, one of the things sort of investigated in that book is like how we should relate to like these sort of like political heroes who are probably very disconnected from us, even if, you know, we share certain things. Like, you know, both me and, you know, Colin Kaepernick were Black. We both got, you know, he's got 2 white parents, I got 1, you know. But you know, pretty quickly you can sort of sense a certain disconnection. So anyway, so I might do a sequel, we'll see.
Professor Neil Watkins.
Can I ask about the animated video for your Black friend that came out? I think that was my first exposure to your work. How did that collaboration come about?
Well, it was I made Alex Crocus he used to be in a band called Wood Spider. So anyway, so the people that animated it, you know, at least primarily were Crystal Downs and Alex Crocus, who are fairly old friends of mine, who are cartoonists and animators themselves. And I met Alex when he was on tour in New Orleans. But you know, kind of shortly, I think before the colored version of Your Black Friend was like published, you know, Alex, because he's a friend of mine, had seen the book, the black and white version, and asked me, because he was trying to get him and Crystal were trying to get their animation studio off the ground and just do projects that they were interested in. So they just asked me to animate it. You know what I mean? They were like, you don't have to do anything. And those are the magic words, basically, to get me to say yes to something, is that I don't have to do anything. So yeah, they just did it. They did a whole lot of work in their off time, and they're animators. So they basically, you know, that meant they had no off time. Yeah, and Silver Sprocket ended up hosting it, but yeah, it was just an attempt to sort of make, you know, albeit a very truncated, but, you know, sort of like an accessible version of the book. I think if I have a regret, is that that it's too hyper focused, or it gives the impression that the whole book is ultimately about microaggressions, and it leaves out other aspects of the book that I think were really important. But you know, it's meant a lot to a lot of different people, so you know, it's good enough, you know.
It's a good entryway into the conversation for people, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right.
It's a primer on that.
So in the since we're talking about collaboration, I also wanted to ask about Bottom Feeders, your collaboration with Ezra Clayton Daniels. Can you talk about what it was like to collaborate with another comic artist and author, like, and any advice for artists who are interested in collaborating? Because those seem to either really go really well or it's a disaster.
Yeah, I was so when Ezra asked me, like, primarily the way I was making, the way I was making money was to do, you know, a bit of a comic. You know, like some guy would hire me to, you know, do the art for his script, and you know, none of them would ever get published or whatever. And I usually didn't like it. And Ezra was someone who I met in Chicago at a show, and he stood out to me because he's another tall mixed guy. You know, at the time we both had beards, and I was like, man, this looks like my cousin. I should see what's up with him. And at the time, there weren't a whole lot of Black people at these shows, you know. So in a lot of different ways, he stuck out. And a year after we met, he just approached me about doing it. And since, you know, I was broke, I had nothing to do. You know what I mean? I was like, absolutely. I was kind of a yes before I saw the script. And then when I read it, I was like, man, this is incredible. You know, Ezra is an incredible writer. He's able to do, I don't know, he's able to create sort of like a very cinematic aesthetic with comics, which could be seen as sort of an insult. But in his case is definitely not. He's incredible. He's got serious Igmar Bergman vibes. So in some ways it was just really intimidating because he also draws. So in some ways it was really intimidating to approach the art for his book, because I was like, Ezra could just draw this himself. You know what I mean? Like, and do a fantastic job. So I think what helped is that, so before we even started the project, I went to Los Angeles where he lives, and we had sort of like a comics camp. You know, I stayed at his house. We ate all our meals together. We spent all day sort of like, you know, going through what characters would look like, the general aesthetic of the book. We'd watch movies that, you know, could maybe help inspire sort of like the aesthetic of the book, you know, the pacing, something like that. And it really helped to create this bond. So now we're friends, you know, which I think that's not the thing that made the process really easy. I think the reason that our collaboration was really easy is that we both respected what was our thing to do. Ezra was the writer, I was the artist. Ezra hired me because he liked my work. So, you know, he was really hands off for the process, and I think it's a pretty good work for that reason. I feel like a lot of these collaborations break down because people don't really actually respect what people are bringing to the table. And if I had any advice, like, trying to think how to say this, something I learned maybe a little too late is that when it comes to like the contracts, like the really boring legal aspect of doing any sort of project, you should just do whatever the most professional people do. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't, you know, before Bottom Feeders, you know, I had, you know, Your Black Friend wasn't out. You know, like, I was just working for random dentists, you know, so I didn't think about, you know, oh, what if we, you know, we want to make this into a TV show? You know what I mean? Like, what if we want to sell movie rights? Like, you know, what happens when we sell this to Fantagraphics? Like, what's the back end look like? What's the split look like? You know, I was just thinking about the money up front. So if I could go back, not just with this project so much, but just sort of like all these general projects, I would do the whole, yeah, it's a very boring and washed answer, but I think that's the big thing is, you know, respecting your collaborator and having a real specific and expansive contract.
So have you, at this point in your career, you talked about being, in a matter of months, moving from a squatter anarchist comic to, quote unquote, more professional, whatever that means, right? So what does that mean in terms of your business practices, like a contract? Like, do you have a lawyer and all that kind of crap now?
Well, I was really able to get by without having to have a lawyer or an agent because Silver Sprocket is such a unique sort of publisher. Like there's a lot of publishers will just print your books, but publishers like Silver Sprocket really invest in you. So like me and Silver Sprocket, we had nothing more than a handshake deal that was distribution. They don't own any of the rights to, like, they don't own your Black Friend. Like what they're allowed to do is basically to publish the book, and then they have to call me when, they want to run more copies. And with that, Avi, the person that runs it, runs around and just, tries to figure out other ways to put you on. They have a lawyer. Avi will like Avi was trying to set up some sort of Your Black Friend TV show with PBS or something. It's like, Avi really doesn't get a cut of that, you're really not going to find a whole lot of relationships like that. So I had to wait off on that for a long time. Now I have a film and TV agent, and I have a literary agent. I sign contracts for everything. I work for a lot of like established outlets. Like I do work for the New York Times, right? So like they send me the contract, and I read it and I sign it, along with my W-9. So in terms of that, like everything is like pretty regimented. It's not just like, I email somebody and they're like, do this, and I'll be like, cool, give me the money first. You know what I mean? It's I think I think the challenge has been to not let professionalism like take control of my life, really, and to sort of maintain like the core ethics of my, the praxis around my politics. Because it's very easy. I think in a lot of ways it would be really easy if I made, my whole life just be political comics, right? Like I do a comic, people email me compliments, I get like a little bit of hate mail, and I get some money, and I can like go down the street and get like, a hoagie, and I'm comfortable. You know what I mean? Like, so it's been really important for me to challenge myself to try and have an arm's distance relationship with my career, even though like, I guess comparison to a couple years ago, it's going well. You know what I mean? To sort of like not buy into that, and also to like not buy into like this sort of like flattened sort of depiction like I see of myself, because publishers are trying to sell my work. We all live sort of in the social media, whatever bubble, like we all got a brand at this point, you know what I mean? Which is very much like a flat version of you, and people sort of respond to that, So yeah, so I just try to keep growing and to sort of not believe my own hype.
Do you feel that pressure with your next book? Because Pantheon is part of like Random House or something, right? Isn't that a huge publisher? But it's like the pinnacle of graphic novels. Like that's Art Spiegelman, that's Mouse, that's Persepolis, that's all Pantheon. Like that's the big time. Is that pressure? Is that pressure on yourself, or like are your anarchist friends like you're a sellout, or?
Oh, I don't think that like, I think there's probably maybe a community of anarchists that would think that I'm a sellout, but like, I guess my friends see who I am, like see how I move, generally, like whether or not, there's no, there's no ethical no ethical consumption under capitalism, so it's like, the choice is not whether or not to engage with it. It's like whether or not to lie to myself about my level of engagement, But yeah, I mean, something that was sort of helpful is that like, I definitely had like a bit of Kanye energy, not, contemporary Kanye, but I'm a God Kanye, that era of Kanye, more 5% of Kanye. I sort of had that energy with my work before I was put onto anything, like before Your Black Friend was a thing. Because I think, right, you kind of have to be to like be an indie cartoonist. Like, no one reads your books, no one pays you money. You know, like, it's one thing to get the energy to do one book as an indie cartoonist, but to get like 3, 4 in, you know what I mean? And you still be like, oh, cool, I'm gonna do it. You know what I mean? You definitely gotta have like some narcissism. So that helped. And then just sort of experiencing like what gets awards, like what things pay attention to. I feel like for me, I came to understand that it didn't have, to a degree, it had a bit to do with the quality of my work, but also a lot of it is just super random. You know what I mean? So like, I'm really excited that Pantheon is like putting the trust in me that they put into Chris Ware. You know what I mean? That's cool. You know, that's a feather in my cap. But honestly, I just try not to think about it very much. Like, particularly, and that's easy these days. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm in here drawing my comics, but like, you know, a certain hour of the day, but you know, there's like weird racists with bats and M16s like a block away from me trying to protect some, you know, like weird monument. We got Proud Boys everywhere. Like, the police is heavy in my neighborhood. So like my vision of myself is not super caught up into whether or not I'm as like famous as, you know, Art Spiegelman, which I will never be. So that's a relief without me even really thinking about it.
So that's interesting. I had a question about, you were talking about those few months where you went from, let's just say a poor comic artist, you know, struggling, right? And then finding success. But I think you've kind of answered like how you've maintained your moral sort of, your moral compass, for lack of a better phrase. And really still, it hasn't changed you, right? It sounds like you've really got your feet on the ground, even though life has changed a bit. And I imagine your obligations are much greater today than maybe they were a few years ago.
Yeah, hey, and to be clear, I'm still broke. You know what I mean? Let's not get it twisted. Yeah.
So we have students on the line and students who will watch this in the future. And so you were really gracious in sharing, you know, your life from about 16 on. But can you talk a little bit about, you know, when did you start? Have you always been drawing? You know, were you drawing as a child? Is this something that you aspired to, or that you used as an outlet, whether or not you saw it as a career as a young person? A little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've always been drawing comics. Like, the first comic I read, I think, was like Spawn, in part because this dude, who was also a black nerd, sort of saw that in me and handed off like a number of nerdy things, but one of them being like some Spawn comics. And I remember liking Spawn, like not knowing who, you know, didn't know anything about Todd McFarlane at the time, but like was like, oh, cool, it's a black character. But this whole comic is not like, it's not some blaxploitation thing. You know what I mean? Like, the focus wasn't all the time that he was black. Like, it barely came up. And then later I realized that's because it was written by a white guy that probably didn't know anything about black people. But you know, growing up, that was significant to me. You know, it was like, you know, it was the 90s. He's all dark and gritty. I thought that was cool. So like, I started drawing just sort of like Spawn ripoff characters, like kind of from the jump, from like, I don't know, 10, you know. I was always really, really passionate about it. You know, like, I don't think that I was like a prodigy or anything. Like, the drawings are pretty bad, you know. It really took a lot of work when I got to college, deconstructing my approach, or like more actually constructing an approach, like going through like all the comics that I like to read and really ask myself why I like to read them, and breaking down, like, I'm like, okay, like, how does, you know, Guy Davis draw you know, eyes on an older man? I think that looks pretty cool. I guess I'll try that out. You know what I mean? So like, my art style getting out of college was like a weird Frankenstein of like maybe 100 so artists that I liked, you know, just one particular approach that they had that I would just sort of do until I found a way that I like to do it that felt in continuity with sort of like the general aesthetic for what I was trying to do. So I think like there's a couple people who are around my age that I think came from that, like the tradition of Guy Davis and Mike Mignola, like Andrew McLean, I think is like someone I can think of who does a lot of work for Image. So yeah. Hopefully that's an answer.
Thank you.
How did your family feel when you said you were going to go to art school?
Well, I mean, I was pretty lucky with that. Like my mom, let's see, neither of my parents went to college. My mother, she's an artist, you know, she's a seamstress. That's how she like paid, you know, for everything, which is impressive in of itself. You know, she's was working for, you know, just some like clothing company in our small town, you know. But you know, she liked to paint and sculpt and dance and stuff. So when I got accepted to colleges, she was you know, really encouraging. So I got a lot of family support. You know, and my dad draws too, you know, or at least he did. So that was fine. You know what I mean? I think like my mother was always just like, because I was such a troubled kid, you know, and she was happy I wasn't in prison. You know what I mean? Like she was like, oh, okay, like he's doing things that are constructive. She's less excited about the anarchism thing. That's always been a bigger problem.
She's worried about you. That's all.
Well, my mom's a Trump supporter, so she thinks I'm like like Antifa, like super spy or something.
It gets more complicated. Okay, interesting. Okay, wow.
How does that go? How has the last 4 years been?
Well, I mean, to be honest, like me and my mother, like we lost contact kind of early on. Like, you know, she was, you know, she voted for both Bushes. You know, she voted for W twice. Like, I had like, you know, this has always been like a thing that my mother has been like a pretty like standard like evangelical Christian conservative. It was definitely like, you know, I don't have to tell anybody that it's like a whole new energy to be like a fervent Trump supporter. You know what I mean? And I think too, there was a degree at which my mother, like there was a coherence. Like I think there's a lot of our experiences with like, you know, like the right for a long time, like the Fox News right. We were like, well, there's a degree of consistency. I think that your ideas about the world are terrible and wrong, but there's a consistency. And like my mother now is so totally embodies what feels like a wild, inconsistent array of sort of like very like racist, classist, bizarre ideas. And, you know, some of it, you know, because for a while she was just like, she's super Christian, doesn't believe in abortion. Boom, she's a Republican. And now it's like, I don't like, why is Trump your guy? Right. You know what I mean? So we haven't really been in contact because it's like, what do you talk to? Like, what do you casually talk about? You know what I mean? Like, because my mother, like a lot of like, I don't know if she's a QAnon supporter, but she's definitely like a conspiracy person now. And that's all she wants to talk about. So I'm like, I don't know, like we kind of have nothing to talk about. We'll have to figure it out eventually. But yeah.
I think it's a situation a lot of families are experiencing presently, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a couple friends who are also Black that have a white parent. It is definitely like a unique sort of intersection of experiences to be a Black person with a white parent and trying to figure out what your responsibility is to sort of like, you know, like when people are like, you know, like some boomers are racist and people are like, what do you do with the racist boomers? And they're like, well, where are their millennial kids at? You know what I mean? Like it's the kids, you know, job to sort of, you know, like get their parents, you know what I mean? And for me, it's like, I'm the subject of racism. And also I got a racist parent, you know, I got a couple racist family, if we're honest, but you know, it's like, I got a racist parent. So it's like, it's a weird sort of like, small, like micro sort of dynamic that very much reflects like what's going on in America in some ways.
Your Black son, I see it in the future.
Oh God, should love that.
Okay, so I have a completely ignorant question. I have to admit, I'm not familiar with body horror.
Hmm.
Can you, what is that? What does that mean? Like, what does that phrase mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's like, so for me, like the frame of reference is like the main frame of reference is like Cronenberg, like the Thing movie, like The Fly, shit like that. And it's I guess it's really just horror that is specifically centered on like the inhuman sort of like distortion of like the body of the human body, that can sort of speak to like a lot of different experiences. Right. I think that's a very, very general sort of description of it.
Great, thank you. So let's see, we've got a question from Deckard. Ben, can you please describe your creative process? Like, do you have a usual sequence of steps, writing, drawing, coloring, revising, and so on? And how long does each stage usually take? For example, to create a single page.
To create a single page, it really depends. Like, so you know, like I still do Dayglow comics, you know, but you know, I do nib comics like very regularly, right? Like I'll get hired to do something, and they have sort of their own processes because one, you know, like the sci-fi stuff, the personal work I do is sort of like the approach is often different. Like I really like to do sort of like manga inspired, like aspect to aspect, sort of like panel transitions, you know what I mean? So that can take any sort of time. And then the nib stuff tends to be like primarily very text heavy. And then I'm sort of working back to sort of like have something that looks more like a synthesis of like drawings and text and stuff. Like for the nonfiction stuff, I'm always overwriting. So for either one of them, like if I'm trying to sort of like just think of a story, I will like I got like a different kind of playlist, you know what I mean? I got the bag, so I got a Spotify account, you know. So I put my headphones on and I'll walk around my neighborhood, I'll take a run, and sort of think about it, or maybe I'll do something that makes it hard for me to think about anything. Like sometimes like a focus, like a mental focus, and then sort of like a distraction will help me think of something. Like the other day, I was at an Enterprise rent-a-car being like really frustrated because I had to go through like 6 different desks to rent a car and thought of a comic in the middle of complaining about that. So, you know, you never know where it's going to come from. And then I usually start with writing, you know, the like thinking process, like I'll try and sort of create like, whatchamacallit, like sort of like a trailer for the comic I'm going to make. You know what I mean? Like all the big moments, you know what I mean? Which is usually like when the playlist is helpful. You know what I mean? Like usually the playlist has like a range of different, you know what I mean? I got your Travis Scotts that go into like, you know, I don't know, goes in your tier of wax or whatever, you know. And then when it comes time to sit down, I'll get like little bullet points and I'll try to just sort of mark out like the beats and sort of expand from there. So usually like by the end, what I have is like a kind of like pretty loose script. And for the nib at that point, I got to send that in with like, you know, it'll be the script broken down in panels, you know, with like it looks just like a movie script, or like like a movie script with like, you know, action that's happening on screen, da 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 da. If it's a personal work like Dayglow A-Hole, I probably will go from the dialogue straight to just sort of thumbnailing it out. And at that, you know, when it comes time to visualization, like because I overwrite, I'm just like cutting. I'm just cutting. And then yeah, from there it's like a nib piece, I'll like if I'm covering something like the Philly riots, I'll go through social media and news and stuff and sort of like if I was there, sort of recall different things and try to, you know, pull together a bunch of reference and stuff. So yeah, at that point it gets like pretty the steps turn into micro steps and it's kind of boring to explain, but that's the general idea.
And Ben, when you do a project for somebody like the nib, is the turnaround, like I know illustrators, sometimes it's 48 hours, right? Between a final product. What is it like when you're doing projects for the nib?
Right, I forgot the time. The writing and the penciling take the longest, and then the inking and the coloring, which unfortunately, in some ways, the most fun for me. That doesn't take that much time at all. Um, I I think that I could do like a fiction page in like 8 hours, and a nib page will take probably a little longer. You know what I mean? Depending on like whether or not it's a 4 panel or something, but like probably like 10 or 12 hours, you know what I mean? Depending on like a lot of the nib stuff has like crowd scenes and stuff, you know what I mean? So that's like a lot of it. It's like I got to draw people running in a burning cop car, you know, so it's like all these things got to get reference from different angles and stuff, you know. So it takes a little longer.
I always wonder how illustrators and comics and other folks with that quick turnaround, like how do you have a private personal life when you're like, oh, hey friends, I can't come to dinner tonight. Like I have a project due tomorrow morning, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, particularly starting out, I learned to say no to a lot of social things. Now I try to break it down and say no to work and to people sort of equally, you know what I mean? It like, but yeah, it's like comics are incredibly time consuming. I like didn't really understand that until actually I went to college for comics. And everyone I date, I think is like the conversation I ultimately end up having with them. It's like you read it in a couple minutes, but I had to spend like 2 days on that. You know what I mean? So it's hard to explain. I briefly dated a cartoonist, and that was cool, but we didn't have to have that conversation. And also, we never saw each other.
Right. Oh, interesting. Okay, so let's see. We've got a question from Rihanna, and then I think I've got a couple closeouts because we're getting near time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So Rihanna asks, do you ever question yourself before submitting your work? Do you get nervous if readers will like it?
It's a good question. Thank you for the question, Rihanna. Big fan. Yeah, I mean, was it Chris Ware did like a really great sort of, I guess, like editor's note for this McSweeney's collection from like many years ago, in which he talked about how miserable he felt producing comics, um, which was funny to read. It's like, you know, because at the time I was like, oh, Chris Ware is like one of those pinnacles of sort of like success. You know what I mean? He's like a legendary cartoonist. But it was sort of relieving. It was relieving to sort of be like, oh man, like I also feel kind of miserable, you know, and like really not very confident when I make comics. So in a lot of ways, like that is my experience. It's like, particularly if I have like a close deadline, it's like I don't know how good the comic is, you know, like I'm relying purely on my abilities my baseline abilities as a cartoonist to produce something that's readable and entertaining, you know. I think that's like the first skill I learned in school was how to finish something. And then I feel like the last, or like the most recent sort of big important skill for me was to produce something like readable and like professional, even if I don't feel inspired, have no ideas, and hate what I'm doing, you know. I think it also helps I have like a number of friends who are also cartoonists, like my friend Ron Wimberly, or like Tana Tucker or Ezra, who I can, you know, if I have the time, I can send my finished work to and be like, or even just like, you know, pencils or something, be like, how does this read? Does this look good? Does it make sense? So that's helpful. And sometimes, you know, you get a really, really good editor. Like Matt Boris is like at the Nib is an incredible editor because he's a really, really good cartoonist. And he almost always improves the things that, you know, he's editing me on. So yeah, so I think constructing a really good support system. Comics, much like insurrections, are only as strong as their support system.
Thank you. Good. So I think the final question I'll ask, if I know you've mentioned a huge number of artists who influence you, but is there anybody that is really exciting you, and a group of artists or a collaborative or an artist whose work you'd like to amplify and suggest that we all look up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they need my help, but you know, Richie Pope and Nicole Ham and Connor Williamson, and Asia Bay are really, really good cartoonists. Yeah, they're all doing a lot of good work, and you can find them all on Instagram.
Of course, right? Great. Oh, well, unfortunately, we're at time, but I really want to thank you, Ben, for your time. It was great spending a little bit of our day with you today. So if you all don't mind, I just have a couple things to share, and then we can all enjoy our afternoons or evening, depending on where you are in the world. So please fill out this really quick short survey.
tinyurl.com/wignallfall20.
The link is here, and it just helps us to improve our future programs. So we'd appreciate it if you could do that. And also here's a slide if you want to learn more about native land acknowledgement. You can also visit
usdac.us/nativeland, native-land.ca.
But huge thanks to you, Ben, for your time and energy and creativity and your amazing work. We appreciate you.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for attending, and take care. Be well.
Logo, Chaffey College. Wignall Museum of Contemporary Art Home Edition. An outline of a house appears around the text.